The darkness of the California night enveloped the sprawling Montecito estate like a suffocating blanket as Harry pulled his black Range Rover through the wrought iron gates. His knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel, jaw clenched so tightly it ached as he forced himself to keep his emotions in check during the long drive home. His keen military training meant Harry had spotted the signs almost immediately upon returning from his week-long humanitarian trip to Colombia, no matter how Meghan tried to cover her tracks. Subtle things, lipstick shades that weren't hers on a discarded coffee mug, unfamiliar masculine deodorant scents lingering in the bedroom, even a single dark hair too long to be his own on the bathroom floor. Had it been anyone else, perhaps he could have rationalized those little inconsistencies away as mere oversights in the haze of a busy life. But given the source, he knew his instincts were correct, that sickening, familiar feeling of distrust curdling in his gut like rancid milk. After all, lies and deceptions were what had formed the bedrock of his relationship with the former Meghan Markle from day one. The garage door hissed upwards as Harry pulled into the subterranean parking bay, shadows flickering across his grim expression from the overhead security lights. Sure enough, the bespoke black Cadillac Escalade customized for their private protective detail was parked in its usual spot. So the protection officer on she-donkey duty tonight was still here, likely making himself at home as he always did whenever Harry was away. Another dull ache lanced through Harry's heart as he sat motionless behind the wheel, composing himself for the confrontation to come. Some part of him kept desperately wishing there was any other explanation, any chance he might be mistaken. That his marriage wouldn't be another casualty of the bitter, endless divorce between truth and delusion that had ground away at the former senior royal's life for years now. More than anything, he didn't want to lose his beloved children in the carnage to come. Having experienced the trauma of his parents' implosion up close, Harry had sworn to be a better husband and father, breaking the generational cycle of pain and acrimony for good. And yet, here he was again, tiptoeing down that same miserable path while forcing himself to confront reality. With a bone-weary sigh and one last silent prayer for strength, Harry climbed out of the SUV and trudged through the parking bunker toward the main house. His footfalls seemed to echo deafeningly in the still night air, each one marching closer to a confrontation he wasn't sure would ever be survivable for his fractured family unit. Meghan had always played by her own set of rules, pushed every boundary to its limit with shameless audacity. In quieter moments, Harry wondered if her willful boundary erosion was just coded into her very DNA, passed down genetically from her similarly relentless, ultra-driven mother. Perhaps there was no point in granting her the benefit of the doubt anymore. His tie had already been loosened during the long flight back from South America, and as Harry ascended to the main foyer area, it joined his suit jacket in being roughly discarded on an antique side table. He needed to feel unfettered and braced for anything that might unfold after more than enough of Meghan's toxic dramas over the years. Some deep, atavistic part of him was already anticipating a scorched earth conflagration. The main floor sitting room spilled flickering blue light across shining hardwood floors from the enormous flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace. Squinting through the dim shadows, Harry thought he could make out the unmistakable shapes of two figures sitting together on the plush leather sofa. His hands unconsciously clenched into white-knuckled fists as his stomach roiled with sickening dread. So the worst fears he'd harbored were all confirmed tonight. One booted foot fell in front of the other as Harry forced air in and out of his lungs with deliberate calm. He was a soldier, he reminded himself over and over. He'd endured the ravages of war, had stared death in the face on scorching desert battlefields. He could handle this wretched, long overdue reckoning like a man. Suddenly, a familiar bell-like laugh rang out from the den, shattering his concentration and flooding his senses with a fresh maelstrom of rage and disgust. Meghan, she wasn't even attempting to hide her lurid indiscretions anymore. Before Harry could regain control of his spiraling emotions, another rumbling chuckle answered hers, the deep tones unmistakable. It was the voice of Jeffrey Knight, the stoic, powerfully built former Royal Marine who led their Los Angeles security team. Of course Meghan would choose someone like him, Harry fumed, the tendons standing out in taut cords along his neck. A man wed to duty and honor, just like Harry himself once was, before having his integrity so completely eroded away by that remorseless American succubus and her endless mind games. In that moment of lucid fury, Harry felt the all-too-familiar sense of kinship with the bodyguard even as his marriage was being detonated from within. The thought caused Harry's control to rupture at last in a volcanic eruption of rage. Well, what do we have here? He barked out at full drill instructor volume, storming into the den with fists clenched tighter than steel vices. A cozy little rendezvous while Prince Husband's been away saving the bloody world? Both Meghan and Geoffrey Knight violently started apart from one another on the couch, equally shocked faces whipped around in abject terror to see Harry looming over them with fury etched in every line of his face. For a long, agonizing beat, the only sound was the conflagration of breath being sucked in by 3 lungs and the tinny background noise of whatever inane TV program Meghan had been distractedly viewing. Then, the dam of outrage burst completely as Harry took in the scene before him at point-blank range. Meghan's hastily rebut-toned silk blouse, the security guard's tousled hair and flushed skin, the unmistakable mingling sense of their exertions in the air around them. "You, whore," the prince roared with unrestrained rage, one shaking arm extending to point an accusing finger directly in his wife's face. "With this bloody animal, in our home? Is this what I deserve after everything, after struggling for years to make you happy, just to be old by my own goddamn employee?" Shamefaced but uncowed, the oak tree of a man called Geoffrey Knight rose slowly to a fighting crouch, instincts honed in the Royal Marines kicking in as his hand drifted toward the sidearm holstered along his chest. Before he could properly assess the lethal threat standing before him, Harry whirled on his heel and delivered a shockingly ferocious boot straight to the bodyguard's solar plexus. Air exploded from Knight's lungs in a mighty whoof as he doubled over, barely clinging to consciousness as his knees spilled out from under him in an ungainly sprawl. Meghan's shrieks joined the cacophony, high and piercing like nails across an endless chalkboard as she frantically tried to insert herself between the bristling alpha males. "Harry, wait, stop. Let me explain, it's not what it looks like." The desperate last gambit predictably fell on deaf ears as Harry was now in a berserker haze, all sense of self-preservation immolated in the flash fires of his all-consuming fury. While Knight remained doubled over, wheezing for breath, Harry seized one of the ornate candlesticks from atop the fireplace mantel and raised it high in a two-handed grip. "You bastard, look at me when your last breath escapes those lying lips," he bellowed, red mist obscuring his vision and all sanity as he brought the heavy metal candelabra crashing down. Meghan, ever the defiant warrior when her claws came out, threw herself in between the two embattled titans just as the marble-sized brass ball at the stick's head descended with concussive force. Too late to check his swing, Harry could only look on helplessly as the candlestick's weighted knob connected with the side of Meghan's skull with a ghastly, melon-like, crunk sound. Time seemed to grind nearly to a halt as his wife's eyes registered that final shock of physical trauma before rolling back in her skull, body pitched forward like a deactivated robot in slow motion. A thin rivulet of blood began leaking from the grievous scalp wound almost immediately as the former actress crashed to the shining parquet wood, crimson already forming a sickening haloed crown around her head. "Oh God, Meghan!" Harry cried, the growling beast of his anger dissipating like a flame abruptly extinguished by a malevolent wind. He collapsed to his knees next to her immediately, gathering her frighteningly still form up into his arms in sheer desperation while whipping his head wildly to lock eyes on the bodyguard. "Geoffrey, what have I done? Call for emergency assistance, for the love of Christ." Whether from the sheer shock or his own lingering injuries from Harry's punishing kick, the burly security man seemed paralyzed in petrified inaction. His jaw worked soundlessly as a thin trickle of blood leaked from the corner of one nostril, eyes feverishly tracking the armored vehicles of his night terror training exercises cruising across the outer perimeters of his mind's lens. "Do it, call for help." Harry roared again even more frantically, cradling Meghan's unconscious body in his arms and reflexively checking her pulse points. They remained strong, if thready, but the bloom of deep red darkening in her chestnut hair surged outward with horrifying speed.